Finally, we're cruising in proper sunny conditions. It's not full sunshine, but enough to give us over 3000 watts, and that is more than we need to travel currently at around 6 knots. So welcome to France. We're currently at the Rhône and Saône River junction. It's getting warmer, spring is here, and the sun is still pretty low, but as I'm moving closer toward temperate Mediterranean climates, I've come to realize that we can take solar input for granted. It simply works, even on unoptimized solar, such as on the Helios 11 that I built in my backyard. So the first priority of creating an efficient solar yacht is actually not the solar. Solar and batteries are so efficient and they're always improving that our main concern becomes the efficiency of the hull, and a hull also that carries sufficient amount of solar panels. So let's take a look at this drone shot, seeing how the Helios 11 slides through the water. Here we're cruising at around 800 watts, going around 4 knots. 4 to 4.5 knots is the real infinite range tested on the Helios 11 in average conditions, taking into consideration sunny days, cloudy days and rainy days. 24/7 non-stop cruising at 4 to 4.5 knots is pretty good for something you could build on a DIY budget. Here we're going 5 knots at roughly 1500 to 1600 watts. The wave making is increasing, but it's a pretty smooth ride. At 6 knots we need roughly 3000 watts, so you can see it's increasing in the wave making, and the wake is still pretty clean, but it's no longer the optimal solar cruising range for constant travel. In this drone shot we're at maximum speed at 6 kilowatt. That is the greatest output of my tiny electric outboard, and we're going around 8 knots. Clearly the wave making is increasing, but still the wake is kind of clean, and it doesn't look like I'm forcing it through the water. At the speed shown here, between 4 to 8 knots, it's clear that the hull slides through the water pretty cleanly, and you wouldn't expect this kind of performance out of a 6 kilowatt motor. And then we can ask what happens when we increase the waterline length, let's say by a meter, refine the hull shape further, and also mount on a higher efficiency, higher power engine that not only increases the top speed but reduces the amount of watts needed for cruising. So I see we can lift the performance with 1 knot even with the same amount of propulsion, and this is exactly what keeps me so motivated to work on the True North Yachts channel, as we can evolve the Helios 11 into something with a economy cruise speed of 10 knots and top speeds of 15 to 18 knots. Sounds a bit like fantasy, but we've already confirmed the solar abundance, and now it is up to develop the most optimal hull shape that is also low cost, allows abundant living areas and comfort. In the end of the video we will also take a quick look at the very long monohull versus a hybrid of a monohull, as it's very narrow but still a twin bottom, to increase the performance and the comfort without making the build expensive or complex. Let's start with a common misconception that a large liveaboard boat where you have a lot of space and all the living systems needs huge amounts of propulsion to move forward. It's partly true, because we've been conditioned to believe that all boats need to be overbuilt bathtubs that are short, stubby, fit into marinas and require 200 horsepower to move forward. But that is not necessary if you're open to economy cruise speeds of 7 to 10 knots. It's only when you want to go extremely fast on an extremely heavy boat that you need like 500 horsepower. Some people don't actually believe that the Helios 11 could function on a 6 kilowatt motor that is equivalent to a roughly 9 horsepower petrol outboard. The police were checking the documents here a couple days ago, and they asked how large of an engine I have on board. When I said 6 kilowatts, they told me that I should not go out in the canals because it was overflowing and the current was 4 to 6 knots. They laughed at me, but actually the previous day I had relocated going upstream and I had no problem because of the top speed of roughly 8 knots on the Helios 11. Of course, that depends on how heavily I've loaded it. And in reality, the 6 kilowatt is an overkill because I almost never drive on 6 kilowatts. The optimum speed sits at around 2000 watts, and the optimum day cruise speed when I have some sunlight is at around 4500 watts. Anything above that just gives diminishing returns, so I could have a 3 or 4 kilowatt engine instead. But it's good to have that 6 kilowatt because if I end up in very heavy headwind, I can still keep moving forward at roughly 6.5 knots. If I were cruising only in coastal and archipelago conditions, I would actually just go for a 4 kilowatt outboard. 8 to 12 kilowatts is nice because you can transition into that semi-planing speed, and the larger motors are slightly more efficient as well. In addition to my first-hand experience here on my boat, I have another observation. These are the narrow boats that are probably very heavy. I don't know exactly, maybe 15 tons, 20 tons, and they are narrow, they are long, and still they move forward at reasonable rates on like very small engines. And that brings us to the first principles of hydrodynamics: hull length, waterline length actually, and width. Nothing else matters as much as these two components. As requested in the community post, we gonna talk about the simple, stupid, yet efficient hull. As long as you're not planing, not hydrofoiling, not moving way below or way above hull speeds, a simple and long hull will always outperform a refined and shorter hull. So if you take something that is simply long and narrow and has some curvature and sharpness in the bow, you already have something with around 90-95% of its total optimum. This is why my designs and the Helios 11 looks too crude to function, but if you look at real-world examples such as cargo ships and barges, they are very close to their hydrodynamic optimum. For something with a cruise speed around the hull speed, there's really no reason to add a lot of curvature. It will actually make the boat slower unless you aim to sit at the very low economy cruise speeds of like 3 or 4 knots. It's usually these overbuilt, mass-produced sailing boats that have a lot of these curved shapes, and we're mistaken to believe that those are refinements. They're actually covering up design flaws. They need more buoyancy, and also because they haven't included a tilting keel to reduce the heeling, the boats must perform at extreme heeling angles, making the boat very round, also impractical in the indoors space. And that is the relief of a solar sailing boat, because you are always straight. You don't need that rounded shape, and you're optimized for high-speed cruising, and your boat is not too heavy. It doesn't need additional buoyancy, so it doesn't need to sit in very deep with a rounded shape. So when I say that we shouldn't refine the shape of the hull a lot, how then will we increase the performance? We simply make the boat longer. Adding waterline length increases the hull speed. increases performance in waves, increases the solar area, and also increases the functional, livable indoor space. So if I were to make one core upgrade of the Helios 11, I would simply add more waterline length. I'm gonna do that with the reverse bow, possibly also increasing the length of the hull to overlap all of the swimming platform, instead of adding solar, instead of getting a better motor. We keep it simple, and this is true also for the next designs. So this leads us to semi-displacement Performance Explorer hull types. The question is, how can we make them as long as possible, as narrow as possible, without compromising comfort? We want lots of cabin space, we want the build to remain simple, we want sufficient solar, and also aesthetics. That is how I've ended up with the Helios 22 design. I was looking at making sort of a true catamaran, a swath style catamaran, 13 meters. But then I realized that with the same amount of labor, I could almost make a 22-meter monohull instead. And then I asked myself, which will perform better? And because the 22-meter monohull is so narrow, sits so deep, has barely any windage, it would probably outperform a swath catamaran of 13 or 14 meters. Not in top speed, but realistic cruise speeds for solar boats. It looks a bit crazy that it's almost entirely straight, and the bow isn't even that sharp. The bow doesn't need to be that sharp. This is not a racing boat. We're not gonna go 30 knots in huge waves. We're gonna go 50 knots in huge waves, and that is okay because we have so much inherent wave piercing capacities on such a narrow hull. This waterline width would be 2.5 meters at the widest point, and this would allow the boat actually to sink deeper, making it roll less, making it more stable, and also reducing the windage. We would add a bulb at the bow to further increase the efficient waterline length. This would just effortlessly glide through the water, and because it's such a long boat that still has a reasonably wide cabin of 3.5 meters, you would fit a lot of solar here, roughly 30,000 watts, and the space is endless. The only problem is the configuration of the space. Do I want to walk like 15 meters from the stern all the way to my living room, to my bedroom? Will that be luxurious? Will it feel awkward walking through this narrow corridor of the monohull? Or could we take this concept of extreme narrowness and length into something else? So I designed a twin bottom monohull. I'm not gonna call this a catamaran because it's not a true catamaran. It's a monohull with two bottoms. It's similar to a twin bottom powerboat, but way longer. We're not concerned about waves slapping the bottom because we already have way more comfort compared to the monohull. Way less noise and way less rolling. The beautiful thing about this twin bottom is that it still behaves like a monohull. It's like a single solid structure that pierces through the waves, has low windage and low build complexity. Surprisingly low build complexity, and because of the Helios 22 kind of becoming too long, that will actually increase complexity because you need to figure out how rigid it needs to be. That insane length of 20 meters plus 2 meters coming from that reverse bow and the bulb, it is significant. But if we tone it down a bit, make it a bit wider, a bit shorter, and twin bottom it, maybe we have the solution. What do you think? The beauty of these two options is that they still operate primarily under the first principles of hydrodynamics. length and waterline width. Those are the only things we're really interested in. Because the hulls are so narrow, we don't need to care too much about the wave piercing because it's already inherent. We make the bows fairly narrow, fairly sharp, and then we put on the bulb on both versions to further increase the efficient waterline length. And we're not talking about $1 million budget. This is gonna be built out of plywood and glass fiber, most likely basic solar panels and pretty basic batteries. I will build either of these for roughly 100,000 US dollars. I'm not kidding. If I would have far greater budgets, I would still build out of plywood and glass fiber. Maybe if the funding would increase to beyond 5 million, then I could consider changing to more exotic materials, carbon fiber and foam core. But before that, I would simply again make the hulls longer and the ships overall a bit larger. Because if you have a millionaire class carbon fiber foam core yacht that is, let's say, 20 meters, and then I come with my 25-meter plywood hull, I am faster, I have more solar, and I have more living quarters, and I built it for, let's say, 200,000. It's insane, and it's very important to remember length and width. We don't need ultra lightweight boats, we actually prefer them to sink in deeper. Currently on the Helios 11, I'm upgrading batteries, getting more supplies, more food, more gadgets to sink the hull deeper, slightly lowering the top speed, but still increasing the range and greatly increasing the comfort and safety. So I'm talking here about $100,000 budgets, building near super yacht level performance and luxury boats. At what point would I really start using carbon fiber? I think never. If I had enough money for huge carbon fiber builds or other exotic materials, I would skip yachts. I would start building ground effect flight assisted marine vehicles. I would register one for 40 euros in Finland as a boat, and then I would have over 1,000 nautical miles day range because flight is far more efficient than traveling through water when you reach a certain level. But back to the present and back to the boats. We have the Helios 22 or the twin bottom monohull catamaran hybrid to build. I will need a couple hours only to generate all the dimensions of the bulkheads using pen and paper and some artificial intelligence. That's how quickly we can make it. And because of this simple, stupid, yet efficient hull design, it is possible. We don't need advanced curvature, we just need simple measurements, a straight, narrow hull with some curvature in the bow. So now we've established the prime objective, building extremely cost-efficient solar yachts that are actually pretty fast and never need fuel. If you like the developments and the content, consider supporting the next prototype by becoming a channel member or by learning more from the books I've written to you about solar yachts. In the next video, we're gonna go deeper into the actual plans of the Helios 22 and the twin hull. Take care, and I'll see you in that video.